Hello. Today, we're going to be exploring some rather interesting NES games. Last time, we talked about a Sega Genesis Akira prototype. This time, we're going through some of Fuzhou Waijing's NES bootleg games. We'll be playing some Golden Axe 3, an interesting variation of Contra, and a demake of Resident Evil. Believe me, this stuff is pretty interesting. In the early 1990s, video games were spreading across the world, but in China, the rules were a little different. Official consoles like the Sega Genesis or NES were rare for many in China due to the strict import restrictions and high costs. So companies like Fuzhou Waijing filled in the gaps with unlicensed yet creative and in some instances straight up bizarre variations of the popular titles found on said consoles. Let's take a quick look at a few of their titles. Golden Axe 3, a simplified NES port of the Sega Genesis beat-em-up. Waijing manages to extract the core mechanics from the original into 8-bit form, but the experience feels a bit hollow. D-pad for movement and an attack jump button. There's also a magic button that doesn't really work too well. You gotta press both the buttons at the same time, but it's a little unresponsive. The character sprites are pretty cool, but the enemy spamming chain attacks is really annoying. Also, the music will drive you mad, and chasing those annoying creatures will also drive you mad, but it's still fun. It's not too bad. I mean, imagine playing this for the NES at the time, right? Especially with the limited options they had, so that's always something to keep in mind here. A bootleg adaptation of Super C, Contra 2, for the NES, Waijing introduces their own take on the classic. Standard NES run and gun gameplay, run with the D-pad, jump and shoot with buttons. The controls are responsive but feel slightly off due to the inconsistent hitboxes and strange enemy patterns. Random power-ups drop whenever they feel like it, so the difficulty spike can feel a little random. Good luck, speedrunners. But maybe we should open a category for bootleg games, right? For real, that the enemy placement feels like it was designed to troll you. The Lion King, a bit of a crusty NES port of the Lion King from the Sega Genesis and SNES. Waijing's version was not it. It really was not. Basic platforming mechanics, but Simba's jump just feels really floaty, and collision detection is inaccurate. The sound effects are ridiculously loud, drowning out the background music that is a little awkward to begin with. This is one of those games I didn't make it too far in. I grew up spamming the original game and Aladdin as a kid, so I just have a low tolerance for this version of the experience. And finally, Biohazard, or Resident Evil, as we know in America. Honestly, a really fun demake of Resident Evil for the NES. Waijing simplifies the game into a top-down shooter with a good number of classic Resident Evil puzzles. And when I say top-down shooter, I don't mean like Smash TV. I mean, it's more like an interesting RPG-style top-down game. I like how they handle the aiming and combat system. It plays out like a rhythm game. You have to time your shots or you'll end up taking some damage. Aim at the enemies by holding the shooting button to start attacking before they get to you. The inventory is really cramped, so you need to make use of the storage system. There are ribbons scattered throughout the game as well that you can use to save your game with up to 4 save slots. And remember, this is an NES game, so that's pretty cool, right? Another game where the soundtrack is on constant loop and will actually drive you insane. This was actually a pretty fun experience. I ended up getting stuck in the game a lot longer than I expected to. It's really important to emphasize that Waijing wasn't alone in the bootleg scene. Other companies like Nanjing and Li Shang also made a name for themselves with unlicensed adaptations. Nanjing, for instance, created a variation of Final Fantasy VII, bringing the PlayStation RPG to the NES. Wildly simplified game, but the ambition is insane. It's actually pretty dope. Li Shang created a variation of Pokemon Yellow for the NES, which allowed players to experience Pokemon on hardware that I'm sure Nintendo was totally cool with. And don't forget YJ Company, who delivered their take on Street Fighter 3, with some very questionable design choices. So what happened to these companies anyway? Well, China opened its markets, and as a result, pressure from the new international businesses led to stricter enforcement of intellectual property laws. Simultaneously, official game consoles became more accessible, and Chinese game developers like Tencent and MiHoYo started joining the race. Today, companies like Waijing are a bit of a relic of a very specific time in gaming history, a time when creativity often collided with legality, but ultimately driven by the desire to make gaming more accessible. I think it's easy to call Waijing a team of pirates, but I also understand the Robin Hood argument. If there's a country out there that banned Mass Effect, I would champion a company demaking it to get that story to the masses. So what are your thoughts on these games? Has anyone played any of these guys? Honestly, go ahead, take a look at their library and see what those guys are up to. They got some pretty interesting games, and you might find some funny content. Hope you all have a great day. Take care. So in my previous video, I talked a little bit about my uploading and what I plan on doing. So far I've been recording some content for Fatal Fury and a few other fighting games, so definitely exploring those. But I also want to explore more, I guess, music. And so one of the first games I want to touch on is Shinobi. I've always loved the Shinobi soundtrack, and it's actually something I still listen to just regularly. Like while I'm working out, I'll still listen to that soundtrack. Same with like Streets of Rage. You know, there's plenty of games out there that I hang on to, and I think that there's power to a game where you can close your eyes and still hear the sound effects, or still play out the first level and just like hear the sounds and the music and all that, and it just still clicks. 20 or 30 years later, you're still hearing those sounds clearly without the screen being on. You can hold a fake controller and still play that level. I just think that there's power in that, so I want to explore some of that. Take care.